Everybody, welcome to another Think With Me Thursday here at Effective. My name is Justin. Glad to have you on the stream today. Made a couple of changes around here, namely the fact that I'm not streaming to LinkedIn anymore at this moment in time. We're just doing this on YouTube and on Twitter. So if you're seeing this on YouTube, welcome. On Twitter, thanks for joining us. There will be a little bit more interactive content on YouTube, so if you want to jump over on that stream, you can. Otherwise, feel free to stay right where you are at. Today, we're going to take a further look at the book 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Burkeman. I'm just going to go through and do some processing inside of Obsidian. So if you want to get a chance to see how I process through literature notes, things that I have highlighted in the past, and convert them into notes and permanent notes inside of my vault, this is the opportunity to do so. Plus, there is a poll in the YouTube chat about the different types of content that you've enjoyed if you've caught these live streams before. Be sure to answer that, because that'll help me formulate some better plans for how to structure these live streams going forward. I know a number of you have enjoyed the Q&As. I have as well. So keep asking those questions. There's a couple of ways you can ask questions as well. Number one is just in the live stream chat, especially if you want to throw a super chat out there. That would be much appreciated for the question. But then also you can go down into the description and fill out the form that's linked there. It'll take you to an Airtable form. You can just fill out a couple of things, because sometimes what we'd like to do is take these questions and then formulate them into full videos on our channel. And so having those questions there helps us process through that, but then also queues up some things that we can answer if, for say, you're not on the live stream by the time that we get to it. So anyway, we're going to dive into 4,000 Weeks today from Oliver Burkeman, and let's get to it. This has been a fun book to dig into. I really enjoyed Burkeman's philosophy around productivity. In fact, he just sent a newsletter out basically saying, don't develop habits, which was quite contrarian of him, because there's a lot of productivity advice out there and studies that show that habits are a good thing. So if you haven't checked out Oliver Burkeman's stuff, do so. You just Google Oliver Burkeman, and I believe his website pops up. He's got a newsletter called The Imperfectionist, which I really like that name. Definitely recommend checking that out. I'm just going to be hanging out here in Obsidian, and feel free to chime in with any questions or thoughts that you might have in the process. The thought that Burkeman has here is saying that a lot of times we run around really busy because we don't want to face the idea that we really only have one shot at this life. But what's cool is that there's so much flexibility in life too. Once we get over that fear of failure, there's a lot of possibility that opens up. What am I doing? Oh boy. I keep hitting the wrong keys. Silly me. This is actually probably better as a separate note. That is. Not perfect. This note's not perfect in what I'm trying to say, but I think it conveys a lot of it. The point that I'm trying to make here is that when we embrace the reality of life, life is short, that we're going to make mistakes along the way, and that's okay to make those mistakes. There are many ways to overcome those failings, and many of those failings are inconsequential to the big picture of life. We don't want to fail at the stuff that really matters: taking care of our health, taking care of our family, building meaningful connections and relationships. A lot of times, what we value most in our work careers and cultures that we've built, especially in Western society, is the fact that what am I trying to say? The thing that I think we run into in Western society is that we've elevated career success with the ultimate goal to achieve in life. And I don't think that that is a correct and healthy way to live. Obviously, there are seasons where career is going to be your primary focus. That's not a bad thing. But when you're looking at the grand scheme of life, if it's only about career, there are many missed opportunities along the way. And I think that is something to keep in mind. And I think that's a big piece of what Burkeman talks about in this book is it's not all about success. Sometimes we have to look at the big picture of life and then be okay with that. That life is more than just work, despite the fact that much of our productivity culture has kind of hinted at otherwise. It's not really it. I think there's something in here too that I want to hit on. So there's this idea you can see here in this this quote. This is kind of the key thesis, I think, of Burkeman's book, is that the more you try to manage your time with the goal of achieving a feeling of total control and freedom from the inevitable constraints of being human, the more stressful, empty, and frustrating life gets. But I think there's something else here too. We talk about sometimes in productivity and people who talk about success, we talk about them in terms of abundance and scarcity. There are these mindsets, an abundant mindset says there's always enough resources. All we need to do is just grow the pie and then everybody can benefit from it. And that's a good thing. A scarcity mindset says there's not enough resources. There's a finite number of resources and I have to compete and take over these resources from other people so that I can have my share of the pie. When I have a share of the pie, somebody else does not get a share of the pie. I think this mindset can apply to time as well. We can have an abundance mindset towards time, or we can have a scarcity mindset towards time. So an abundance mindset towards time would say, well, let's talk scarcity first, actually. I think that makes sense. A scarcity mindset towards time would say, there's never enough time in the day to do all the things that I want to do. I'm always fighting against the clock. My schedule is full. I'm super busy. I don't have enough time. I'm super stressed out, and I have to just keep pushing to get through to even get what I have on my plate done. And maybe I'll finally catch up someday. An abundance mindset would say, there's always enough time to do what's most important, and that everything else can fade away. It sees time as a friend to focus on the most important things instead of something that we're fighting against. And I think that's a key mindset to shift. And I'm working on doing that myself. Instead of seeing the lack of time, I need to start seeing the net positive amount of time that I have. So there's a thing with that that I'm trying to dig into here. Try to write that out as best as I can. I think that kind of gets the gist. Two mindsets we can have towards time: an abundance mindset and a scarcity mindset. A scarcity mindset sees our days for the utter lack of time. We say things like, my schedule is so full, I don't have time for anything else, or I'm so busy. An abundance mindset looks at the time we have and thinks, I always have enough time to do what's most important to me. Everything else can wait or fade away. This mindset sees time as a friend instead of an enemy. I'm constant fighting against. I think this note's important too. While there are seasons of life where our calendar is full and our lives are truly busy, we can still have an abundance mindset toward time by prioritizing the big picture important things, the items that move the needle forward in all areas of life. That's why I think it's so important for folks to spend time not only doing weekly reviews, but sitting down quarterly or even annually, looking at where did you come from and where did you get to and where are you heading next? And not just for work. That's one of the big trip ups that I see with folks is that when we approach productivity topics, we do so solely for work. And that I don't think is all that healthy. Because life is more than just work. I think we all know that there are so many different elements to life. But when we don't take time to review the areas of life outside of what we're doing, then those areas get neglected in some regard. What is that quote? I'm thinking of a quote right now in my head. Yeah. Peter Drucker. What gets measured gets managed. So I know in the context of business, that quote is something that is more about measuring business metrics and revenue and productivity as a business concept, things of that sort. But I think it applies to life in the sense that measurement doesn't have to be quantified. It doesn't have to be I'm a 6 out of 10 on this and I'm a 7 out of 10 on this. So I think that is a helpful way to measure things. But a measurement can also be a qualitative look at where I'm at right now, what went well, what didn't go well, and what can I do to improve going forward. And when we do that for the big picture, maybe using a tool like the Wheel of Life, I think we can be positioned well to manage the other areas of our lives. One thing that I did actually just this last week was, I guess what I'll call a seasonal review, because it wasn't really a quarterly review, but because I left my job last week and I'm trying to figure out the path forward for what's coming next. I spent some time trying to figure all that out. And I just sat down and I did basically what I do for an annual review at the end of the year. I go through a Wheel of Life. I look at the accomplishments, what went well, what didn't go well, what I should start and stop and keep doing, and then just do some dreaming about what the potential future holds going forward. And out of that, I do this Wheel of Life exercise where I basically just show, from 1 to 10, what each area of my life is as far as some kind of health. And that alone helps me to set objectives and goals of where I want to take the lowest areas of my life so I can intentionally focus on them. I'm not building habits and trying to say, I'm going to do this every week. I'm going to sit down and do this every week. I'm going to do this every day. But it's more of a mental awareness of that thing so that I can make progress over a longer period of time on it. Sometimes I'm successful at that and sometimes I'm not. But I think when we take the pressure of ourselves to have to perform at every level, in every area, at the highest level every single day, I think at that point we are freed up to focus on lots of different things at once when we're able to focus on them over a course of time. So, for example, one of my main goals over the last few weeks has been to build community, or a few months anyway. Just, with the things that have happened in the world recently, some connections and relationships weren't as strong as they used to be. The feeling of connectedness to other people was a lot lower. I'm sure you can probably relate to that in some regards. We've all been kind of feeling a lot of that. So one of my objectives was to rebuild community again. And so this was starting to get involved in some organizations in my area and being more intentional with getting together with friends and just really honing in on those things that make me feel connected as a person, and fostering those relational connections. And I wouldn't have been able to discern that as easily as something that I needed to do without taking the time during my annual review to note, oh yeah, my social life really sucks right now. And I need to put some effort into changing that. But that did not mean that I'm going to sit down and call somebody every single week and get together with somebody every week. It's been a top of mind, but yet inconsistent everyday effort, but it's been a thing that I've been pursuing every day. And so I think doing something like that has been really helpful for me to keep the big picture important things top of mind. Because also at the same time, I've been pursuing things with my health and obviously with my career since I'm looking for a new job right now. So there's multiple things you can pursue at one time. You can't multitask in the moment, but you can pursue multiple areas of life and growth in those over the course of a few months or even a year. So that I was finding an interesting thought, because I know we'll just kind of let me just expound on this a little bit then, because this has been something that I have been wondering about. Maybe you can provide some insights too, if this is something that you've been wondering about too, or if you've seen the same thing. But one thing that's caught my attention lately is that oftentimes we focus so much on the details. We're down into the weeds about productivity. We're down into the weeds about the tasks that we're doing, how we're spending every minute of our day. But we neglect to look at the big picture and how, from the big picture, focusing on certain activities yields better results over the long term than solely focusing on the day-to-day rush or the whirlwind, as the 4 disciplines of execution talks about. I mean, we see this from the hyper emphasis on tasks in task managers, like how do I manage my individual tasks that need to get done versus what projects am I focusing on and where am I putting concerted efforts forward, or what goals am I focusing on and how do I tie all those into a goal, the actions that I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. I think this also comes into play too, where we get really hyper fixated on the individual components of, say, a PKM system. The point that I'm trying to make here is that I think it will do us all well if we can take a step back more often and look at the big picture. I've been kind of dreaming through this concept. My working name of it, this model, is the VST approach. And basically, it just stands for vision, strategy, and tactics, where vision is the guiding idea of where you're going. Strategy is the paths that you're taking to get there or to build into that. And tactics are the day-to-day things that you're doing. Sometimes they're even the tools that you're using and the systems that you've built to get there. We focus so much on the tactical level, and we don't spend near enough time at the visionary and the strategic level to keep our lives on track. And so the way that I've been approaching this in my life, I'll give you a real practical example of this. Vision is my yearly theme. I don't go much broader than that. I don't get too detailed in it. I literally just have a yearly theme. This year is the year of rebuilding, because there's a number of things that I'm rebuilding in my life. That is the vision that keeps me focused. Now, obviously, not everything that I do is going to lead up into that vision, but the main idea, the main direction that I'm heading is toward that one. Then at the strategy level, this is where I've been experimenting with the concept of OKRs, objectives and key results, where each 3 or 4 month period, I'm picking a couple of objectives where I say, okay, these things lead up into this idea of rebuilding. How am I going to intentionally put effort towards that, into building this thing? So as I mentioned earlier, community has been a big one. And so Then that filters down into the tactical elements. And this is where things get a little bit more gray area for me because the tactics can shift from day to day. Um, the vision is really clear. The strategy is a little less clear, which is interesting to think about it. And then the tactics are even more muddy because how I approach building community today might look different to tomorrow because life shifts and moves around. But when I have these guiding principles in place at the top, the vision and the strategy, it's a lot easier to shift those tactics around. The tactics don't matter as much as if I'm making progress to get there. And so bringing this concept full circle, the thing that I see is I think it's important for us productivity thinkers and then us just being normal people to give more credence to where we're going first and then letting the strategies and the tactics of how we approach that come naturally out of that. For example, a person who is building a content creation business on YouTube, the way that they approach life and work is going to be way different from someone who's climbing the corporate ladder. There might be some crossover in tactics that are used, but ultimately it comes down to like the whole environment and the type of work that they're doing is way different. It's the same thing for someone who might be pursuing being really good at mountain biking. I guess it's just a top of mind example for me versus someone who's training for a marathon. There might be similar tactics that they're using, but those activities are so vastly different that the tactics they're going to use summed up are going to yield different results, and they're going to shift and change from day to day. So that's really kind of the core that I'm getting at here with this, and it's kind of been spurred along by this discussion about big picture important things and being able to prioritize them, is that I think it's really important just to take a step back, look at the big picture, try to prioritize what's most important in a season, especially if you're busy, and then really hone in on investing those things. There are other things in life that can fade away, for a time. And sometimes they'll have to crop back up. Obviously there's the urgent assignment that comes up at work that you just got to fit in somewhere. But looking at the big picture of life, I think it's really important to not forget where we're going. Anyway. I really like this, what Burkeman's saying here. It means standing firm in the face of FOMO, fear of missing out, because you come to realize that missing out on something, indeed on almost everything, is basically guaranteed, which isn't actually a problem anyway, it turns out, because missing out is what makes our choices meaningful in the first place. I fully agree with what Burkeman's saying there. When we miss out on stuff, when we say no, it makes our yeses so much more powerful. But it also makes the things that we're saying yes to that much more meaningful. When we try to do everything at once, nothing has meaning. So being able to hone in on the meaningful stuff by saying no to stuff instead of fearing missing out. I think that's a really good thing. By the way, if you're just joining and you haven't seen the poll over in the chat on YouTube, be sure to answer that. Question there about live stream content you've liked the most. Pretty cool though. It looks like the Think With Me items here, where we're just going through the vault, talking through stuff, has gotten the most votes so far. That's great. Q&A is something as on the bottom, but that's right. I like doing that when we're able to. And then tutorials, teaching you about stuff. Happy to do that too. One of the other things that I was thinking about in regards to live streams is thinking a little bit more meta for a second here. So if you have any thoughts on this concept, do let me know, because I would love to get your feedback on it. But I was just getting back from a mountain bike ride this morning, and this thought occurred to me. You know how like a couple hundred years ago, it was really common for apprentices for you to apprentice with someone to learn a trade or a career or a skill or something of that sort. You would literally work with that person for a period of time so that you could learn how to do things. We haven't really had that in modern society for quite a long time, at least not in intentional ways. But this thought occurred to me that in a lot of regards, YouTube, and especially live streaming, has the potential to be the new apprenticeship in a way. And I was thinking about this in terms of mountain biking and learning. People tend to learn best by watching other people do things. At least I do. I mean, some people learn ideas differently than others, but when we're actually doing things, I think a lot of people learn well by watching someone do something, trying it themselves, and then ultimately teaching somebody else to do it. There was the idea from surgeons, where the way that surgeons learns is you see a surgery, you do a surgery, and then you teach the surgery, because it allows them to move a lot more quickly, and then also prevents them from building this surgery up into this bigger thing in their head than it actually is, so that when they actually get into the room to do it, well, then like they actually fail, and they make more mistakes, because in their head, because they've watched so many, that they have basically what they've done is they've built it up in their head, and now they can't properly engage with it in the actual moment. Anyway, the point that I'm trying to draw here is I kind of wonder if YouTube and live streaming in particular is an opportunity for new apprenticeship. What I mean by that is doing things like this Think With Me Thursday, where you can watch me go through my PKM system, or even doing something like doing a weekly review or working on a productivity system, getting the work done, and just showing you the process of doing it so that you can glean and learn things along the way. We can talk about it. I can answer questions. You can ask questions along the way. Because a lot of times the way that our modern jobs are structured, we don't always get that anymore. And then especially if you're learning something like productivity, you're not really getting hands-on help. I know this is probably why cohort courses have become such a big hit, because there's no interaction with an online video. You can leave a comment, you can ask a question, but you may or may not get an answer, and you may or may not get an answer that satisfies your question if you do get an answer. But live streams and cohorts and things of that sort allow you more interaction and chatting with other people. So anyway, this was just the thought that I had, is that I wonder if YouTube is a way to build more apprenticeship out for things that we can show more easily and do that. I was watching, the reason this kicked in was I've been watching mountain bike videos People who just literally strap a GoPro to their chest and they go down trails and they're talking about what they're doing as they go. And I've gleaned so much information about mountain biking and how to do it just from watching those kinds of videos. Not specific tutorials, but literally people who are out on the trail doing the thing and then talking about it while they're doing it. I'm not sure if you'd find anything like that helpful from me or anybody on YouTube, but definitely do leave a note in the chat or in the comments if you're catching this after the fact. If you think that might be something helpful, I think I'm going to be stewing on this one a little bit more. This highlight's interesting to me. This confrontation with limitation also reveals the truth that freedom sometimes is to be found not in achieving greater sovereignty over your own schedule, but in allowing yourself to be constrained by the rhythms of community, participating in forms of social life where you don't get to decide exactly what you do or when you do it. Burkeman's kind of tying two worldviews together here, and I think that's an interesting thing. In the West, we tend to have a very individualistic look on life. Don't tell me what to do. Don't tell me what I should be doing, when I should be doing it, or anything like that. I want absolute freedom and liberty from any outside influence on my life because I can make those decisions. But if you were to go to, say, South Korea or another Asian country, there's a very communal mindset toward life where it's not necessarily people living in a communal sense, but it's more of a what's my role in the bigger picture where with everybody else. And I think that is something that we can learn from here in America. And what he's talking about here about being constrained by the rhythms of community, I think is an interesting take. Because it is true that oftentimes when we live in relationship with other people, especially if we move into places of leadership where our options are more limited, and there's really nothing wrong with that. But a lot of times our Western mindset and individual mindset towards the way life should be can get in the way and think that that's a bad thing. This is interesting too. There's an alternative, the unfashionable but powerful notion of letting time use you, approaching life not as an opportunity to implement your predetermined plans for success, but as a matter of responding to the needs of your place and your moment in history. Reminds me of that Lord of the Rings quote, Gandalf. Oh man. I can't remember it off the top of my head though. Let me look it up. Yeah, I can't find it. Yeah, all we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us. There we go. That's one that makes this makes me think of that. Probably just note for that. There we go. There's your nerdy bit for the day. I like how he calls out the fact here that it's irrational to feel troubled by an overwhelming to-do list, but yet I still feel overwhelmed by to-do lists very often. Because let's be honest, we are not always rational people as much as we would like to think that we are. So, fun fact, I didn't realize this. Parkinson's Law was written by the English humorist and historian C. Northcote Parkinson. It's funny that it's interesting that a humorist, I think, wrote this. But Burkeman's point here, in fact, it's the definition of what needs doing that expands to fill the time available. I think that's a very apt observation, because it's all about, oh man, there's just so much to do. It's not that this one task is going to fill the time available. If I give it 8 hours to do this one task, I'm not going to get that task done within 8 hours. It's more hinting at the fact that when we have so much to do, either we're going to procrastinate on it and it will just fill our lives with things to do and make no progress, or we'll just spend all of our time doing things. So it's kind of a double-edged sword in some regards. He says here, when you're overwhelmed, basically, what's needed is, instead of trying to make yourself more efficient, create a willingness to resist such urges, to stay with the anxiety of feeling overwhelmed, of not being on top of everything, without automatically responding by trying to fit more in. Instead of clearing the decks, just embracing that fact. I think I'm a big proponent of sitting with your feelings a little bit. I don't like wallowing in feelings. Let me clarify this a little bit. Sitting with your feelings to the point where you're processing through them, you're recognizing what's causing them, and then you're creating an action plan of how you're going to navigate that thing. This doesn't mean putting items on your to-do list. It literally means that, like he's talking about here, like, I'm just going to let this list be overwhelming, and that's okay. I can't control this avalanche of to-dos on my plate. There's always going to be one more thing to get done. There's always going to be that one more load of laundry or that extra load of dishes that needs to get washed. When we're able to stay with those feelings, we can move through them more easily, I think. But instead, a lot of times we try to make them go away. Negative feelings are not a bad thing. Being able to move through them is a good thing. Being able to resolve them is a good thing, but just reacting to them is not necessarily something that I think is beneficial. And that's kind of what he's getting at here. Yeah, because he's just combating this idea of the illusion of one day being able to make time for everything. And that's just unfortunately not true. I also like this point here too. He's talking about how effort gives something meaning. If you let somebody else design and remotely mail a birthday card, you never see or touch the physical item yourself. It's better than nothing. But the sender and recipient both know that it's a poor substitute for purchasing a card in a shop, writing on it by hand, and then walking to the mailbox to mail it. Because contrary to the cliche, it isn't really the thought that counts, but the effort, which is to say the inconvenience. When you render the process more convenient, you drain it of its meaning. So as I noted down here, effort gives something meaning. I think that's a thing lost, I know, on me a lot of times lately. Is that effort is the effort that we put into things, the inconvenience that we put ourselves under to make something happen is what gives something value. I think this is why people write books. Books are not fun to write, from what I understand. They're a big, long slog of very, very, very hard work. But it's the time and effort that going through that slog that gives the finished product, that book, value. So it's that effort that gives something meaning, whether it's a birthday card or whether it's a book, whatever it might be, a YouTube video or a handwritten letter. There's just when there's something that someone has worked hard at, we just see it differently. And I think that's also important, and being able to recognize that, because there's only so many things that you can work hard at in a given day or even a given year. You have to be ruthless about what you do and invest your time and energy into those things. I think I'm going to tie this to deep work too. Deep work is very relevant to this idea. Newport's thesis is essentially that deep work is what will set certain workers apart by creating higher value and higher quality work from the place of focus. All right, so that's the end of my highlights for this book at this point. I'll probably come back to that book at some point. I haven't completely finished it. I just want to open up the local graph here and take a look at it. This is always a fun thing to do, I think. The graph view, the overall graph view in Obsidian, I don't find as valuable, but the local graph view, I think, is where it's at. This allows you to visualize the connections on nodes. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the filter and I'm going to up it. I'm going to see where it's at with 2, maybe even 3. There's a lot with 3. I'm going to just look at 2 here. Okay. Yeah, so this is interesting to see these ideas here. Just these connections. Oh, you know what? Let's open it up to 3. Let's see what we can find. I mean, there's a ton of notes here. Part of this is because the book Time Off is connected in here through deep work and otherwise. And I have a ton of permanent notes off of that book. I spent a lot of time going through that. But there's also a number of topical notes here. You can see these links here. The purple ones don't have notes created on them. They're just more connector links is how I use them. Just find it interesting. Haven't messed with the neighbor links before. What did that do? Okay. So it just kind of tied other connecting things together versus just the straight graph out from the node. That makes sense. Remove existing files, add tags. Don't really need that. Anyway, I find the local graph view to be one of the most valuable things to use inside of Obsidian if you're just trying to get a sense of what's connected to what. You can see this is just 2 levels out. There's a number of ideas that I've connected around Burkeman's book here. Oh, this is a old article. Instead of hustle culture, it's cult of the hustle. It's a little little yikes of language. Here's a difference, interesting idea that I'm been thinking about in the past. Quantitative versus qualitative productivity. Quantitative is kind of what we would term efficient or efficiency. Quantitative productivity views the amount of output over quality of output to be more valuable, checking off the most tasks in a day, producing the most deliverables possible in a week. Maximum throughput is the idea. And in my mind, it's a traditional view and approach associated with productivity. But I think if we can make a shift towards more qualitative productivity, the focus on the quality of what's produced over the amount of things produced in a period of time. One high value, high quality deliverable in a week is more valuable than producing 10 lower value quality deliverables. There's obviously a balance with this because Pareto principle kicks in. You can really eke out 20% extra quality on something, get that to that near perfect point by spending 80% more time on it. But there is this place where some things are not worth going that extra, 80% of effort and time. But I think if we can, obviously there's a value for both quantitative and qualitative productivity. But I think if we can find a balance between the two that leans a little more towards qualitative, but allows quantitative to be used when it makes sense, I think there's a number of positive benefits that can come from that. Let me see here. Well, I think we're going to call it a day today. Thanks so much for joining today's stream. If you're interested in keeping up with what we're doing here at Effective, I'll put a link on the screen. You can go over and sign up for our free membership at thinkeffective.co. My plan is in the next few weeks to launch a new newsletter titled Toolbox Tips, where the idea is to give you one actionable tool each week, plus an update on the types of things that we've created and the things that are upcoming, including these live streams. If you're willing, if you'd like to join, do head on over to thinkeffective.co and sign up. And I think that really wraps up today's live stream. With that being said, thanks so much for watching. I appreciate you joining today. I'll plan to do another one of these next week on Thursday as well. So come back then. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, do so if you want to get notified of these streams when they are happening. And in the meantime, stay effective. We'll talk to you next time.